And then also co-founder of Women of Wealth, which is sort of the brainchild and passion project and 501c3 that we've formed, Adipia and I, over the last few years, because we learned how much there is to know in the world of finance that goes beyond the level of what any one person can understand fully within their own sphere of expertise. So, financial products are varied and there's a lot of detail involved. And what I and Adipia discovered was that even the most financially savvy or intelligent women can have barriers to feeling comfortable talking about what they don't yet understand. And we discovered that in even just talking with each other across silos within our areas of finance, how much there was for each of us to learn. And that was sort of the inspiration for WOW, when we learned that, wow, by connecting with each other across silos and expressing the embarrassment that we may not know what one thing means or another thing means, we actually freed ourselves from those inhibitions and empowered ourselves in ways that had never until then become accessible to us. So the Wealth Mastery for Women series in partnership with Leadership Global has been a wonderful series. And what we've been doing is bit by bit, sharing some of the foundation of the X, Y, and Z coordinates that bring any woman and also any man to the table in terms of really empowering themselves more fully financially.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, let's get started with session 7. So we're talking about budgets. And all right. So I think the most important thing when I'm thinking about budgets and finances and investing in general is really starting with why. Why are we doing anything? What is our why? The Simon Sinek principle. And I think with budgets, one of the things that really might come up for those of us who have resistance is, well, why do I need a budget? Like, why do I need to do this? I don't want to do this. It's really not something most people want to do. We have a lot of emotions around budgets because they feel restrictive for the most part. But they're really important because the why is not just why do I need a budget, but what am I working for? And that why really drives you into the dreams and the desires so that you can also measure it. Am I on autopilot? Am I reacting, playing defensive, or am I driving towards my destiny? And so that is a really important starting point. Reframing the whole conversation and the whole concept to be empowering is where this all begins.
And I'd like to add one piece of this too. We all work so hard, and it does really feel often like we're just trying to get through each day with a big list of emergencies and to-dos. And when we do take time to create some kind of a plan financially in terms of a larger budget strategy, and especially in partnership with if you have a spouse or a mate, you take yourself off that wheel just for a moment and you start understanding what you're doing all of that for, as opposed to just spinning, from day to day without a goal in mind. So it's so important to do it, not just from the kind of self-discipline standpoint, but really into the having control over what your day is about on the larger perspective.
Right. So in its most basic form, a budget is a planning tool and it's a wealth building tool. If we budget for our business, then we know that the same principle holds true for our personal finances and for our wealth. So back to the why. Why do I need a budget? Budgets and budgeting are, to me, they're givers. They're not takers. They're not taking things away from us. Again, that sense of like, the budget, I'm not allowed to spend. They give us. Budgets give information. They give data. They're giving us some numbers that we can work with, which provides clarity, perspective, boundaries, which we do need. We're not completely infinite. Not necessarily, not with money, maybe. And they're a planning tool. And they're really important to achieving and attaining the goals that we do set. And a budget really can be your best friend.
And I'm sure some of you have heard the saying, but that which hasn't been measured can't be changed. So there's so much resistance typically to actually doing the exercise of seeing where your money's going. For it's the same as like stepping on a scale or counting calories. Like none of that's actually really fun because this fear of judgment or this fear of facing the realities too, a lot of times. But with money also, and probably even more so than, scales or calories. It's such an eye opener because once you start to see where things are actually flowing, you're able to control and direct it. So I like to think of it kind of as Aditya is saying, they're givers, not takers. If you think about the Roman aqueducts and how they would just take water and direct the flow, and that was probably part of the biggest secrets to their success as a culture. It's the same thing with money. You can measure where it's going just in order to redirect where it's going. So it's not necessarily always about a cutting back. It's about just looking and watching it to see where there are opportunities for redirection for higher and better purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a really great place to start, I think everything, not just budgets, but is defining your money goals. And it really comes down to me, like finding the joy in it, like finding the joy in doing this, because you get to decide what you want and how you want to attain it. And so we always start with questions. What do I desire? What do I dream of? What do I need? What can I wait on? And then, when do I need it? And that also happens, not just me, but me and my stakeholders or my family unit, right, Jennifer?
Absolutely. I can talk to this because there was a lot of resistance in my family about having discussions around budgeting. And this is pretty common, I think. A lot of couples have different takes when it comes to money management. Also, it's kind of fundamental that money is a control issue. I mean, that's really why so many, frictions can trigger around discussions of money, because it does come down to sort of control, and everybody likes to feel that they have some control. So in order to avoid battles, there's often this kind of, let's not look at it, or let's not really get into a conversation because we're apt to disagree. And then there'll be discomfort, or there could be arguments. So that's part of where the avoidance cycles come. But I can tell you that this year, I actually was able to finally have a conversation that was a little bit more around the goal-oriented as opposed to restriction-oriented kinds of budget conversations. And it was a game changer, because when you or your stakeholder, whether that's a spouse or partner, or if you don't have a partner, even with your own self, your higher self, have these conversations, your engagement level into what you're working for together starts to trigger, and it turns it into a whole different thing. So instead of it's like, hey, you're bad or I'm bad, and we both have to stop doing X, Y, or Z, it changes it into, well, what do we want? It turns it into like that joy thing that Aditya is saying, a fun kind of project-based engagement, which is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing about budgeting is the time, money, and financial freedom. So some different ways to think about budgets and just to think about your money goals is to have short, medium, and long-term goals. And then to have different categories. So there's going to be spending, there's going to be a savings category, an investing category, and then an emergency fund. So before we can go off, and this is a suggestion, and attain all the things that we want. I mean, we deserve all the wonderful things that we want. We have to have an emergency fund. It's really important. And relying on credit cards is not an emergency fund. So having some money set aside, and generally speaking, the rule is to have 2 to 3 months worth of your most basic needs. So like any mortgage, not missing any important payments, and what you need 2 to 3 months. Women tend to like to have a little bit more, especially you can use your emergency fund for other things, which actually comes down to the fourth line, which is the effort fund, which is the money that you have for when you just want to say, I'm out. I want to take time off of whatever I'm doing. This is my money. I'm going to take a sabbatical. I'm going to take a trip. I'm out. This is my money. And it's like you're empowering money. And a lot of people love this concept, and maybe it's not your emergency fund, but it's like, this is my financial freedom number. which can be also attained very much with investing and creating passive income, so that, you're basically creating through passive income, like another salary, so that, you can say, I'm out, I'm going to go, I'm going to do whatever I want and whatever I desire. And so the invitation is, what does financial independence look and feel like? And, what does financial freedom taste like? Like, all of this can be achieved with a budget as a tool. Budgets don't have to feel like this, especially like the lady in the top right. So this is not what it has to feel like, even though I know that this can be what it feels like, or what we expect when we get into budgets.
My favorite is the one in the bottom middle. Actually, she's the one.
This one,
I think the one in the bottom middle.
Yeah. So, So, and this is like, it's visceral. When we think about, oh my God, I have to look at my budget, I have to look at my credit cards, like it can be viscerally constrictive. Like, oh, I don't want to look at it. And it's because I think a lot of times what it comes to is like, we think that there's a type of budgeting called zero, like zero budget, where you have to account for every single penny. That is insane to me. I just could never do that. Maybe some people can, but like, that gives me anxiety just thinking about it. And so what I very much prefer, and what I use, and what I'm so excited to share with you, is buckets. So rather than having this zero sum approach to budgets, which really feels restrictive, it's just not a natural flow to have the buckets approach. And that's you have buckets of sustaining, spending, and saving. So I'm gonna exit this for a second, because I'm gonna show you. We're gonna do it a little interactively. We're gonna do this a little interactively today. So, it's not letting me. Okay, so this is what this is what it looks like. This is what I use for a budget. And what we share in Women of Wealth as one of the worksheets. So I would love to make this interactive, and so we can play with it. And so feel free to jump in. But essentially, the way to think about it is how much money is coming in, and then you have your sustain bucket. So this is all the fixed necessary costs that you need, like your basic costs: food, shelter, loan payments, etc. And then you can put as many as you want in here, and you can $0 budget if you want, or not. And then you have your spending. This is your discretionary spending, and then you have your savings. You have your savings bucket. I also added a retirement bucket, which comes pre-tax, but I like to see it because it makes me feel good. Because your monthly this is a net income, and so this all calculates out what your bottom line is. Now there are some guides to how you want to do the sustain and the spend and the save, and that's that about 50% of your net income should be allocated to what, your non-discretionary spending, your sustain. 20%, I have this here. So a lot of like blogs, et cetera, will say that your savings should be 20%, and then your spending should be 30%. I'm currently in a process of trying to accumulate to invest as much as I can, as quickly as I can. And so I'm trying to push as much into the savings bucket as I can. And I'm willing to forego a little bit of discretionary spending in order to do that. So we can play with this. So just imagine that we have 2 monthly net incomes up here. So we have a total money in. So this like you can do this to understand how much money you have for different things. And a general rule of thumb, and this is a really good exercise, is to always take money automatically, like out of your bank account, or if you can, out of your paycheck, to put it in some kind of a savings account so that you just don't see it. It's automatically gone. And so when it's automatically gone, you can see with your eyeballs how much money you actually have left to spend. So right now, so we can do this. I don't know. Median mortgage right now is $2,000. So this is monthly. So we can put some amounts in here, and here somebody else is coming in. And so right now, because most of the money hasn't been like allocated, there's you have 21% to sustain. So I don't know. I'm just going to start putting some numbers in here. And we're going to try to get to the bottom of this. So if I put 3,000 in I put 3,000 here. So now my total in save is 5,000. So now it actually looks like I'm saving 42%, which is way too much. Because, maybe I have a car loan payment, a student loan payment. And so this is all a really good way to just budget it out and to really understand. So when we're doing this, we can see like, hey, like maybe I'm willing, and this can be for a time too. It just helps you, gives you a sense of it. I'm willing to only have 17% of discretionary spending. And for a time, right? This is like, you can play with this, you can do different things with it. And so by doing that, I can allocate more to my savings bucket. And so these are all like, this is a really easy way. So you have, in the olden days before computers, or maybe some people still do this, you would have like jars. And so people would put like, if you got your cash, you would put different cash in different jars. It's the exact same thing. So this is a thing that I use for really understanding what I can afford. So to me also, I've seen this on blogs where they've said, paying off your debt goes in the savings bucket. I disagree entirely, because if you're paying off debt, like credit card debt or like a personal loan, that's not savings. That's paying something back. So it doesn't count to me. Like this is savings and investing. And so with let's say this other bucket is an investing bucket. And I said, okay, I have $3,000 a month. That means that, if I'm trying to save up for something, let's say I want to, I want $30,000 to invest in something, whatever that is, then I know it's going to take me 10 months to do that. Or if I can only allocate $2,500, and it's going to take me 12 months to do that. So this is why I really like working with spreadsheets. Yeah. And so this is how I start. I'm like, okay, this is how I start it. So I know what I'm working with. The thing that might be a little more challenging after the fact, which we'll talk about in a second, is going to be your credit cards, because you have to be really, you have to be really careful with credit cards, because your limit is probably a lot more than your spend limit. And so that's something to be aware of. I just saw a comment. The reason the retirement bucket isn't in save is because retirement, especially if it's 401ks, comes out pre-tax, and the rest of this is as after tax. So this is net. It's your net income. So it's not your gross, because otherwise we would have to calculate our own taxes and all that kind of stuff. So that's why it's separate. I like to track it for myself, because I just like to have everything in one place. But you can see that if I were to put money here, it doesn't touch this up here, because these cells are tied into these cells, which are related to this cell. So it's money in, money out. So this is pre-tax, and this is all after tax. So I hope that all, okay, perfect.
We had a question out of Piangra. Someone had a really great question, which is, how come we don't put the retirement within the save bucket?
I just talked about that.
Oh,
that's what I was.
I'm so sorry. I was chatting in the chat, so I didn't realize that you said that. I'm so sorry.
No,
okay.
I just covered that.
I'm so sorry. Okay.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So so that's like, this is a way to think about it. And it doesn't, it doesn't have to be as like tied in the way that I did it, but it gives you a sense too. So then when it comes to the spend part of it, instead of like $0 whatever, you can just say, hey, I'm giving myself $2,000 a month. I can do whatever I want with it. And so without having to rely on credit cards, a really good way to do this would be to have that amount of money automatically go into a different bank, maybe with its own bank card. And that's what you use for spending. And so when you're out of money, then you're out of discretionary money. That would be like a really good way if you're trying to be like extremely specific about using your discretionary spending. And so again, this is not meant to be restrictive, but it just gives you a sense of how you can budget for the things that you want and the things that you need. Because then that allows you to see, hey, and we'll talk about this in a minute, I'm spending way too much over here. I don't need to spend that much. If I spent a little bit less over here, then I could get what I want over there. And that's all that this is really about, is helping us get what we want. And in my experience, seeing it, it's a very embodied experience, and it takes it out of our head and it puts it down on something, whether it's paper or Excel, that is tangible and that we can work with. Essentially, what I was talking about is this idea of what do I want? And we move with a budget, we move from like, how can I afford it? Or from like, can I afford it, to how can I afford it? And affordability, I'll show you really quickly. So with affordability, it's important with the budget. So I don't know if you've all seen something like this, but this is like the how much house can I afford calculator. And it's along those same lines. And so you get to start to understand, and I'm just going to use whatever was input in here. Like if you're making this much, affordability with any kind of debt has a lot to do with your debt to income ratio. And so this becomes super, super important, because if you're over here and you're saying, well, if I want this mortgage, then, and I have this amount of fixed income, either I have to go make more money or something's got to give. And so this helps you to locate what can give. And so when you do like a calculation like this, it tells you available mortgage payment. And so that means that you can afford a home up to, et cetera. And so this all ties in, this all really ties in together. And so what you'll see here when you're doing an affordability calculation is going to be your debts. And this is why not taking on too much debt, if possible, becomes really important, because one of the biggest factors with affordability of anything is the amount of debt that we hold. So I'm going to show you this really quickly. I don't know if it's going to necessarily make a lot of sense, but this is a worksheet that I was using when we were we sold our home, or we were thinking of keeping it, buying another one, maybe renting it. And so debt to income, this is really important. I want to talk about it real quick, because I know the housing situation is a very real situation for people. But generally speaking, you don't want more than 30% of your gross income to be going to a mortgage or to rent. And so when you're looking at like a mortgage or rent, it's important to know, like your debt becomes really important, so that a lender knows whether you're good credit risk or not, and how much debt they're willing to give you. And so I was using this to help me understand, well, I'm never going to be able to get this loan based on, this amount of mortgage for this amount of house, because my income's not enough. And like so you can see, like, you just play with this to understand. So those percentage numbers are really important. Those percentage numbers are extremely important. And so it comes back to this when it comes to the affordability of basically something like a home or an investment property. So your debt to income ratio, very, very important metric. This, and I know it can be really hard. This is probably like the stickiest, the most challenging, more so than budgeting. But you can budget with debt and for debt, right? Using a system, you can budget for debt. You can budget for, hey, like I might go over this month, I might go under this month, and you can work with yourself and you can use it strategically. We did a previous session on strategic debt, on wealth mastery. And so, like I showed you over here with the mortgage calculator, how can I afford it? It really is like, can I afford this debt? And with homes, with mortgages, I can't even impress maybe enough how important it is not to take on too much debt. Because that's the one thing that you don't want to lose. And it's going to be your probably the biggest asset that most people ever buy in their lives. So when you're looking at that debt to income ratio, if it feels uncomfortable, then it probably is, unless you know that you're going to be making more income later and then it changes, and that's fine. I mean, I know that happened for me where now I think, oh, I should have taken out a bigger mortgage. But I didn't want to at the time. And I'm glad that I didn't at the time. I would rather sleep at night. And so another person here. And, like we talked about last time, and Jennifer, I don't know if you'd like to add something to this, but like really treating debt as a careful investment.
I will. Yeah, I'll add a little on this, because people have different approaches with how they're going to maneuver through the opportunities and the risks that go with debt. Okay. And a lot of it comes down to you banking on you and what, again, your budget and your goals are, and what risks and gambles you're willing to take. And there will be different comfort levels. And I think it's important for people to understand that this is part of the reason you measure, and part of the reason it's so useful to have a tool like the one Adipia has shared, is it helps you really quantify and then calculate if you're going to take a strategic risk. So, for example, I'll share my story. When we got our first home, we went all in. We did what you're not supposed to do. We had essentially enough to get our hold on that house and no money for basically anything else. Now, that was probably crazy. It's probably not advisable, but I wanted to get that home. It drove me nuts that I was spending so much on rent, and I didn't own, and I knew I was in this city to stay. And I'm the kind of person who will just find a way and make it happen. But it was like scraping myself up a cliff with my bare hands. There were times I didn't buy deodorant so I could make sure I made that mortgage payment. Like I would like scrape the last of it out. Like I shouldn't share that probably, but I'm just telling you, like I was determined to keep that mortgage payment. And that was 10 years ago. And now, thank God, all those things I did have paid off. And now I've got, a home, I've got equity in the home, and my financial situation is in a different place. Okay. I made that calculated gamble, and I knew what else I had to hustle to create in real time as I was building this bridge. And there were all kinds of ways I made that work. Okay. But it's not for dummies. It's not for the unconscious, and it's not for just throwing it at the wall and hoping that it sticks, because really at the end of the day, if you're going to take it that close, you need to have a real grasp on like how you can make that happen, or you'll lose your house. And that's the worst thing that could possibly happen, like Adipia has said. It's also important, I think, in this conversation that people understand that if you do work hard to create good credit, if you are really good about making sure your credit is really good, you can get those footholds sometimes. And if you're willing to hustle, but be really responsible with it, sometimes debt gives you opportunities that you just wouldn't get otherwise, right? So it's like so strategic. I think we can't impress enough how strategic you have to be about your debt. If you want to be like one of those zero budget people where you're not going to make a single move until everything lines up, you might never really be able to get out of that box, because it's just really hard to get ahead. But if you can be organized enough to have a really good sense for what you can make happen, and then you can take a strategic debt, then you sometimes can use that debt to leverage yourself further up. And that's where this like precision, and it hasn't it doesn't have to be precision in the sense of everything squared up, everything matches up, like zero it out. It's not like that, because that actually sometimes you have to think about the value of your time too. If you're spending 4 or 5 hours a month just making sure that all the little zeros zero out, but 4 or 5 hours of your time could potentially be your side hustle where you walk, whatever, you house sit or whatever you do to get yourself ahead. If you're doing that instead, you have to be conscious of the value of time and what you can generate with your time in part of that equation too. So, I mean, like the precision versus just having these kind of bucket strategies and enough of a grasp that you can be strategic with how you spend yourself, which is your time, your biggest asset. All that comes into whether you can take on debt and what for. And then that goes back into the budget. If you're taking on debt because you're shopping at like H&M or Forever 21, right? Okay. But if you're taking it on because you're participating maybe in a little crowd-funded syndicate of some sort where you are going to get a little return, and then you know that that's going to give you a little more income, and then that in 3 years is going to make it possible for you to potentially qualify for a loan for a home, right? They're so different in terms of what you get out of it. And I just want to say too that there is a tendency sometimes for people to say, well, I need the clothes because that's how I look and that matters. But I'd say just remember that it's more important to have the internals than the externals. The externals can catch up, like, like prioritize the money that gives you more money, because that's how you can really leverage yourself upward. Yeah, I guess that's the last of like the soapbox part I wanted to share in this, because it's a really complex concept right now, what we're talking about actually.
No, it is. You're right. There's so many moving parts, and we're not prescriptive. I mean, I think everyone knows that about us. We're offering, and it gets really complex, because if I was going to sit down with somebody, and it's not what I do for a living, and like look at it, we could like strategize and make it real fun and find all these different ways. Because I mean, yeah, like if you have a good line of credit and you know how to use it, like I talked about was a couple months ago, like I'm a wizard with a line of credit, and I do pay myself back, but that's like a system that I've created for myself. But in the same way, like I would refuse, even when I was making more money, to spend on myself, because I was like, no, I can't have that. That's not in my bucket. And so I've like had to like let go a little bit and change it. Like I would be upwards of 50% in my savings bucket. And then I would feel, what's the word? I would feel like I didn't feel good. I didn't feel like I had enough for me. And then I became like kind of Scroogey in a way. And then when I could go back and I could move things around, it actually also helped me see the psychosis that I had about the savings too. So it can run both ways. So that I do want to say, like to Jennifer's point, it's complex, and it's emotional, and it's psychological, and it's relational, and it's so many things. Which is why I also think women are so good at this. And when we apply ourselves and get over this idea of like, women are the ones that handle the household budget or the household finances, the spending, and yet, we do so much. And I think what the problem has become over time, or not over time, but that we outsource the money part because we're doing so much else, and that money part got outsourced to our spouse. And so we don't know the budget. We don't know what the total income is coming in and how much should go here and how much should go there. And that's why this is like this process of seeing it is so important. And to be honest, until I started doing this with my husband, we would just fight. Yeah. Half the reason I did this is because we were fighting, because he's not a budget type of person and I am. And so I had to show it to him on paper. And when he saw it, then he was like, oh, I understand what you're talking about now. So this was actually a tool that helped my marriage a lot.
Oh, I want to share too. When you start to do this and you start to plug in, and this goes back to, these are all just not surface, but summary, sky high overviews of some of the work that, for example, we're doing with WOW. Because there is so much that you can do. It's so transformative. But when you also start learning how you create more money with even just reallocating, let's say just even literally even $200 a month from where you were spending it into something where you're saving or investing it instead. And when you can start to show, and you're for yourself first, see like, holy moly, what a dividend that makes in the long run, then you can start to show that to a spouse. Then there's an engagement level that goes in, because it's like, if you're asking someone to stop ordering takeout 4 times a month, that's just annoying. Like, they want their takeout, they're hungry, like they don't want to cook. Okay. But when you say, look, would you like to retire earlier, or would you like to be able to do this or this or this instead, and it's in line with other goals that they care about, you'd be surprised how suddenly that changes the conversation. And that's the key part.
Yeah, which goes back to the goals, which is why the goals come first. The goals come before the budget, so that we can get there. And yeah, you're right. It's like, well, do you want a Starbucks every day, or, do you want that nice coat? Like it can be like, it can be that simple, especially if it's on the discretionary side. So I just want to continue quickly talking about debt, because it is really important. The buy now, pay later loans, please don't fall for this. Like, they are, there's so much money going into these right now. And it's going to cause a huge problem, because it makes it so easy. It's made so that the consumer will continue to consume beyond their means. And yeah, you can like go to Chipotle now and buy now, pay later. That is a massive problem that feeds into inertia. And here's why it's important. And here's why budgets matter to your well-being. So on the left, everyone's aware of the inflation situation, the pandemic, et cetera. It's a real article. It's a real article. And yeah, right. Yeah, it started with it's the layaway movement, but you could do it for everything now. But that company, Affirm, is actually having problems because, they don't take your credit, and it's like 0 interest. And so people don't remember, and then they don't pay it off. And so that's a problem on that company's like balance sheet, obviously. But here's the thing about debt. We use it, and it's important to everyone. It's a useful tool. I use it too. I use credit cards. And if you're asking, or if you have been, or if you follow, but like, how is consumer spending still so strong with inflation being so high? It's because the savings rate has gone down so much. So if you can see we had the highest savings rate, maybe in history, or maybe at least since like the 40s, at 33.8% at the first stimulus payment in May of 2020. And we're down to 6.2%. All right, that money's been spent. And that is the lowest since 2013. It has plummeted. So people have been using their savings. And you can see here on the right, Americans are also borrowing at an increasing rate to maintain the standard of living. So consumer credit rose 7.3%. And you can just see in that blue line, you can just see how it spiked back up. So and here's where I'm going to bring it back to budgets. You need to budget for inflation right now, because we need to add that cost in. And you're seeing it when you're at the store, like you're seeing like, oh, it costs more. Go check your budget, and go make sure you've adjusted for inflation, because what you don't want is to get caught in a credit spiral, because with inflation running at this 8.9, stated 8.9, but a lot higher, like gas, like a lot of things cost a lot more. So this is really important to really understand how we're using that credit and how it's affecting also our budget. So this is there when we go, like we can see how inflation is affecting our budgets and our spending and our savings, because what it's doing, as we saw, is we're not saving anymore. We're just spending. So doing this exercise and checking your budget. You don't have to check it every month. Like once you've set it, you might want to check it more often to see how you're working with it. But after a while, maybe you can check it once a month, and you check it against what you're actually spending. And so the way to do that, and the way that I do that, is I can track my actual expenses from my different accounts on, I use Expensify, but you can do like Mint. And so I look on a weekly basis actually. But I'm also doing like home building and stuff. So I have to like categorize my expenses as they've come in. And so I can look at that and say, man, like this month, we really overspent on whatever this thing is. Or we didn't spend that much. That's great. Like I can just see where the money is going by reconciling to my credit card and bank statements through Mint is the most popular, the Mint app, Expensify, my credit card provider Chase has like a summary of spending and it like categorizes it. And so I can go and see, and that just gives me some peace of mind to understand, like, especially if I have a really big credit card bill one month and like, my natural inclination is to freak out. It's to see why. And I can see, oh, that's because my house insurance payment, it came out this month and it was like a whole extra big chunk of money on my credit card. Well, I had money put away for that, so I can use that to pay that off. So that's the second piece of it. So you start with that budget and then you reconcile it to see how it's matching up. So we can find money. And we did this exercise and wow, I don't know, Jennifer, if you want to talk about it, because it was so eye-opening.
Yeah, what we do at WOW is we have a group of women and it's a mastermind. And so we had each person figure out what their top 10 expenses were and then share it. And it was so eye-opening because it helped, for example, feel a little better when you're like, whoa, I feel like I was the only person spending so much on groceries. And yet you find out, well, no, that's kind of what it takes to feed a family of 2 or 4, or the opportunity to say, hey, maybe I'm doing something I don't need to be doing, or there's a better way of solving for this. It's a really great exercise when you start to see what your expenses are, to find ways to dial into creative savings also. Aditya, do you want to go through the rest of this and then I can talk about at the end creativity and how that comes into things, or do you want me to go through this?
No, we can go through it real quick. So basically, like I like finding money, and it's like in my budget, like it's in the things that like how many of us have subscriptions we didn't even know we had subscriptions for, and like just canceling those, you just found money. There's like finding better rates right now, not really possible because it's a rising rate environment, but you can find better rates on things, and then find better prices on products and services. Like Adrienne just shared something here about $35 phone bill. Like I love that. So, and so that's the thing. You can find it a lot of times. When we're not looking, we don't realize how much we're spending. And then when we look, we can make immediate changes. Like we can all find a couple $100s just by making very minimal, very easy changes.
That's exactly right. So, I mean, and what the creativity part goes into also when you're engaging on this on a full level, if you think about, I'm thinking of some friends right now who are currently in Maui. Okay. They don't make that much money. She's a stewardess or flight attendant, and he's a healer and masseuse. Okay, they're in Maui right now because they don't have children. They volunteered to be kind of there with their friends who were going to Maui to help with the kids and stuff, because otherwise they would. These people own restaurants and are fairly wealthy. They're there to help, take care of the kids and everything. And they're in Maui right now, like basically paying nothing for their vacation, right? There are creative ways to get what you need when you start thinking about it. For example, if you're spending a lot on gas, driving your kids back and forth, but you take the time to do a zip code search and find out who else is in your area, and then you set up a carpool, you can set up more time for yourself and more money because you're saving on gas. Like those are 2 bad examples probably, but it's just when you start measuring where it's going, you have the moment where you can start to say, well, is there a better way of doing this? And the little bit of creativity that goes into it starts to find all this abundance that is actually there. Believe it or not, there are ways of creating more abundance. We tend to just, going back to that hamster wheel, sometimes we're spending because honestly, especially in this society, things are set up for you to spend. They want us to spend and they want us to default on credit, ultimately.
Yeah, no, this is true. It's 70% of our economy is based on consumer spending. So, just like understanding the system that we're in is also really important. So all of this that we're talking about isn't in a vacuum either. It's really meant to bring awareness and having that understanding and knowing that from the inside perspective that Jennifer mentioned, like having that sense of worth from the inside, I think is really important to decoupling from the external factors that are telling us to be, do, and have all of these things that really serve a very few people. And this is not me being conspiratorial. I work in economics. This is how this is. And so we don't have to. I can choose differently. I can, just the same way, like I can choose what to eat to be healthy. I can choose what to do with my time and with my money to be wealthy. And that is my birthright. My health is my birthright. So is my wealth. So it's so important. It's not dissimilar. And my divine higher self nature is also my birthright. And so it's up to us to go find it. We're in a system, we can't get out of it. It's based on fiat currency, it's based on money. That's fine. But you're either playing the game or you're being played. And I want you to play the game. All right, sorry.
I'm holding myself back from saying amen because if there's any one thing that we really want you to take away from this is that this goes so much beyond spreadsheets. This goes into personal power and agency. So this is a great one. Like, motivation for getting around to this is always low. Frankly, part of me was like surprised anybody showed up for this month's topic, because it's like, of all the topics, this is the one a lot of people would want naturally to avoid. And so kudos to everybody who's participated in this month just to have this conversation. And a great way to motivate yourself is to really spend the time on how much better you can feel when you are in control of why you're waking up every morning. What is that 9-to-5 job or that other job that you've got going on? What is it all for? Where's the plan? What's the goal? How are you in charge of that in whatever shape you get your foothold, right? And for some, that's just starting on getting out of debt, or, is like changing some cycles. And then it goes from there, because every foothold gets you another opportunity. And so you can move it all the way through to, even for those who are already comfortable, there's stuff you can do moving the needle into charitable giving, into impact. There's so much power in this process, but to just even motivate yourself as to why you should even do it, it's really picture how you will feel when you're able to do these things. And that usually will make it less of a burden or a chore or a resistance to getting around to the work.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to, I guess, read off the slide, like, how would you feel knowing that you have your finances under control? I mean, we're breaking cycles. We're breaking generational cycles. Like we are. I'm doing this for my lineage, backwards and forwards. And we all do that to some degrees. And so I really invite you to shake off any like generational stories about money, about women and money, about spending, about all of that. And so, that's the thing about this control. I'm a control freak. I want to control everything. That's partly my problem, partly one of my biggest strengths. But I feel safe and secure and confident when I have my finances under control. And so that's for me really important. And that makes me feel a certain way. And then I can go out and I execute based on that embodied feeling. And it's very different than coming at it like being disempowered. So this is all about empowerment. And so how do you feel when you're budgeting for your wealth building? And we didn't have time to go into it today. Maybe we will another time, but basically when you're able to like build a nest egg that's paying you, that's the wealth building. And I'm happy to budget for that as opposed to other things. And it feels amazing to put your money to work for you. And it's amazing to say F it, because I can. That feels amazing. So with that, I don't know if y'all remember the garden. We did this like I don't know, maybe like the second one. And like, is this idea we're building a garden, like we're gardeners, we're tending to our own garden, and wealth is built strategically and it's built intentionally. So without a budget, without an awareness, conscious awareness, a view into our finances, it's going to look a lot like this one on the left. And that's probably how we feel inside too when we're not looking at it. Instead, with budgeting and wealth building, we can clearly set and achieve our goals so that garden on the right is what we see and what we get.
For joining us about, all things financial. This is, our overall mission is just really shifting every woman and every man who's also, part of this mission into a mindset of no longer working for my money and instead having my money work for me. And there's a lot that goes into that. There's access and information about investment opportunities. There's personal work. There's changing your worldview, looking at ancestral stuff, and then brass tacks stuff like these budgeting tools. So if you've, enjoyed this, please feel free to reach out to us at womenofwealth.com. We have a whole mission. You can tell we're kind of revolutionary about this. I mean, it's like deep. Your wealth is your birthright and your cornerstone. It's really not meant to be an afterthought. And just going back to that garden analogy, each of us can be a gardener. That is just like a natural birthright we have as a human, is within our capabilities. And it's all about this access, and that this discourse is really how we get that access. So check us out.